Our first regular order bill, Congresswoman Green's Gulf of America Act of 2025, codifies President Trump's executive order to restore names that honor American greatness. It permanently renames the area formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. This legislation will ensure uniformity and implementation of the new name across government documents and maps. I thank Congresswoman Green for her quick work in introducing the bill in the House.
Just a quick point of correction for your reference to the body of water formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico. It's still the Gulf of Mexico. It has been for a couple hundred years, and I assure you it will continue to be in most of the reality-based world, no matter how much theater we bring to this in this committee. I do appreciate your kind words about Chairman Grijalva, and look, we know Chairman Grijalva was a fighter. And as such, he would surely want me to point out right now that across every federal agency under this committee's jurisdiction, Elon Musk and Doge are indiscriminately purging thousands of essential agency staff. They're thoughtlessly firing career scientists, tribal agency staff, land managers, park rangers, wildfire experts, and numerous other public servants who deliver critical services to the American people and safeguard our lands, waters, and communities. And amidst this unprecedented hollowing out of government, the hallmark legislation that we are considering here today is a bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico. It would be comical if it were not such a profound dereliction of duty. And what else is this committee choosing to ignore while we burn time on this political theater? Well, right now the Trump administration is actively obstructing funding for wildfire prevention to safeguard American lives and property, tribal resources essential for supporting Native communities, critical drought resilience programs urgently needed across the West, and funding for NOAA's storm and extreme weather forecasting. Has Republican committee leadership taken any action whatsoever to address or even acknowledge the serious issues caused by the administration's actions? The answer is obviously no. And one more crisis we're ignoring today that can't go unmentioned. In just the past week, President Trump's reckless tariff plan has driven our markets into turmoil. The S&P 500 is officially in bear market territory. The Dow is cratering. And for the average American, for teachers, firefighters, truck drivers, their 401ks and retirement savings are crumbling before their eyes. And that's without getting into the higher prices that we're all starting to see as these tariffs go into effect starting today. Is the majority doing anything about this looming economic catastrophe that, absent decisive intervention, will profoundly harm every sector of our economy and numerous programs under this committee's jurisdiction? Obviously, Republicans in this Congress are just too busy renaming things like the Gulf of Mexico. The many issues that we're neglecting today are not abstract problems. They're immediate threats to our constituents' safety, heritage, and livelihoods, and they're entirely avoidable problems caused by this administration, and caused by an administration that is going entirely unchallenged by this Republican Congress. And I do mean the whole Congress, because it's not just this committee that's neglecting these issues. Instead, the House voted on a budget framework that would guarantee devastating cuts to Medicaid and surrendered Congress's emergency authority over tariffs. Elon Musk is dismantling the Social Security Administration after calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme just a few days ago. Americans are not asking us to rename places in this moment. They're asking us to lower costs, to protect their savings, to fight for their future. They're asking us to confront and mitigate the real and immediate threats of drought and wildfire. They're asking us to stop the absolute chaos coming out of this administration. We urgently need congressional leadership to tackle the most pressing problems in America, and instead, we are here with distractions and culture war sideshows. We owe the American people better, much better than this. This committee has a proud tradition of addressing real significant problems for the American people, and sadly, today's markup represents another troubling departure from that tradition. It underscores a broader pattern by this Republican Congress of prioritizing partisan stunts so thoroughly that it cannot and will not carry out the real work of governing. Now, some might dismiss all of this is harmless theater, but every minute and taxpayer dollar spent on these distractions is time and money not spent on the issues that Americans care most about. I urge my colleagues to change course. Our constituents did not elect us to ignore real problems and to substitute political theater like this in the place of governing. Let's do our jobs and get back to giving the American people what they deserve. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to the markup notice, it is now in order to consider H.R. 276, Gulf of America Act of 2025. Ask unanimous consent that the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries be discharged from further consideration of the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purposes of debate on the bill? I recognize myself, and I speak in support of H.R. 276, the Gulf of America Act, which is sponsored by Representative Green of Georgia. This legislation seeks to codify a portion of President Trump's Executive Order 14172, restoring names that honor American greatness, which renamed the body of water formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. By enacting this legislation, we ensure consistency in the reference to laws, maps, regulations, and records. On his first day in office, President Trump signed Executive Order 14172, which directed the Secretary of the Interior, acting through the Chair of the Board on Geographic Names, to oversee renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Throughout our country's history, presidents have made changes to the names of America's lands and waters. Today, we are taking the necessary steps to codify this action into law permanently. The Gulf and its 1,600 miles of coastline within the United States are and will continue to be critical to our country's economy. The Gulf of America region is home to 14% of the United States' total crude oil production, 48% of the country's refining capacity, and 51% of its natural gas processing. President Trump has made it a priority of his administration to make America energy dominant, and that starts in the Gulf of America. It is nearly impossible to overstate the importance this region has in securing a future of American energy dominance. Along with energy, the Gulf is a lifeblood of commercial and recreational fishing, tourism, and is one of the most productive ecosystems in North America. President Trump's executive order and Representative Green's legislation embrace the numerous ways the Gulf of America powers the American economy. Americans have long been the dominant driving force behind the economic value of the Gulf, and this legislation simply reinforces the many ways that this treasured resource has benefited the United States. I thank Representative Green for her work on this legislation. The U.S. Geological Survey's Board on Geographic Names has already begun implementing the executive order, but passing this legislation through the committee will ultimately enact it into law. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and I yield back. Is there further discussion? Representative Huffman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when House Republicans finally tire of all of this political theater, all of this kissing up to Donald Trump, all of the burning of Congress's precious time and resources for absolutely nothing but show, for bootlicking and sycophancy, call us. We have a lot of serious work we would like to do with you. We have a lot of governing that we would like to do. But right now, our country is careening towards disaster under the Trump administration. His trade war is wreaking havoc on the economy. Our constituents are struggling to make ends meet with rising costs. Agencies aren't able to provide essential services for the American people because of the mass indiscriminate firings of federal employees, facility closures, chaotic government takeovers by Elon Musk and his tech bros at Doge. Agencies under this committee's jurisdiction have been gutted, kneecapped from doing their work to ensure public safety, mitigate wildfire risks, or protect our irreplaceable natural resources. We're not here to address any of that today. In fealty to the president, House Natural Resource Republicans are considering a joke of a bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. If you were to choose a bill that perfectly embodies the Republican Party at this moment in history, this might be it. The bill does absolutely nothing, but it kind of says everything. It captures the MAGA, anti-immigrant, imperialistic rhetoric of right-wing cable news and podcasts, while also giving cover for the president to censor and retaliate against news outlets that choose to call it the Gulf of Mexico, which, by the way, is what every other country on earth will continue to call it. It tightens the stranglehold billionaires in the oil and gas industry have on Team Extreme, while ignoring all of the chaos President Trump's policies are inflicting on Gulf Coast communities. President Trump might think he was the first to come up with this idea, the Gulf of America, but it was actually a comedian, Stephen Colbert, back in 2010. And at that time, oil was gushing from BP's blown Deepwater Horizon well that killed 11 people and crushed the coastal economy of Louisiana. Colbert called it the Gulf of America because, to quote him, "We broke it, we bought it." Republicans seem to have forgotten this incident as they advance their drill baby drill agenda. But as we approach the 15th anniversary of the tragic Deepwater Horizon disaster, I would like to remind my colleagues, we continue to see record-breaking oil and gas production because for decades, big oil has clung to sweetheart deals that it receives from the federal government. And all of us pay the price. It's the surge in climate-driven disasters like the catastrophic wildfires in California, the cycle of extreme drought and flood across the West and the Midwest, supercharged hurricanes pounding the Southeast, and more. It's the unmatched levels of pollution in communities in the Gulf, primarily black, brown, and low income, which have become a sacrificial altar for the fossil fuel and petrochemical industries. And while Trump and Musk destroy our economy, our communities, and our planet, congressional Republicans can't even be bothered to face their own constituents at town hall meetings. But now, after weeks of silence, Republicans finally have a plan to address this compounding crisis. They're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico. This is what they think the American people want. And talk about unpopular. According to a recent Fox News poll, the majority of Americans actually oppose this name change. They know it's a joke. They know it's a stunt, even if President Trump and Republicans seem to be taking it seriously. You know what's not a joke? Firing firefighters, weather forecasters, disease researchers, aid workers, destabilizing global markets with mindless tariff taxes that are wrecking people's hard-earned retirement and college savings, turning our allies and neighbors into enemies, threatening to cut Social Security and Medicaid services that will be in much greater demand once the Trump recession really gets rolling in the weeks and months to come. This is an insulting charade of America first nonsense at a time when the American people need serious policy prescriptions. Instead, we're getting stuff like this that makes our country a global laughingstock. I oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Stauber, you're recognized for 5
Thank
minutes.
you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of H.R. 276, the Gulf of America Act of 2025. The Gulf of America is one of the greatest crown jewels of the United States. Not only is the Gulf home to an ecosystem that supports diverse marine life and migratory species, it's also an incredible economic resource for the United States, ranging from tourism, recreation, commercial fishing, energy production, including renewable oil and gas production, shipping and trade, and so much more. The Gulf of America plays a significant role in the cultural identity of the United States and is enjoyed by countless Americans. And not only those who call the Gulf Coast home, but countless Americans across our great nation, including my home state of Minnesota. I believe renaming the Gulf to the Gulf of America is a great testament to this nation. And I am proud to support this legislation to codify President's January 20th executive order. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Hearing none, it is now in order to consider amendments to H.R. 276. Do you wish to be recognized, Ms.
Yes, sir, I do.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I can't believe that given everything of consequence that's happening in our country and the world right now, that the Natural Resource Committee is taking this piece of legislation seriously. That we're spending our time and taxpayer dollars on a bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America while there's so many more urgent and critical issues for us to deal with is just offensive, and it's an abrogation of our duty to the American people. I got elected to represent the people of my district and this country, not to kowtow to any one individual. Congress is a separate and equal branch of government, and our job is to serve as a check and balance to the executive branch, not to roll over and give up the authority directed to Congress by the Constitution that we all swore to uphold. It's April. We're about to enter hurricane season, fire season, we're in tornado season, and we aren't prepared because key people at NOAA, the Weather Service, the Forest Service, FEMA, and all of our disaster response agencies have been summarily dismissed, fired. These agencies are gutted with no thought to the importance of each individual's work, making the system more inefficient by making it harder to access disaster relief and emergency services. When we spend time on performative and jingoistic things like renaming the Gulf of Mexico, we're neglecting the serious work that we're sent here to do. It makes a mockery of the democratic process. And while we're spending time and taxpayer dollars doing this, the administration, with the blind support of my Republican colleagues, is kneecapping the federal workforce, busting unions and taking away collective bargaining rights, abducting legal residents and sending them to foreign prisons, trampling the right to free speech and due process, crashing the economies and the 401ks and pensions of hardworking Americans with these erratic and just, with these erratic tariffs and stealing the earned benefits of Americans, our veterans and Social Security recipients. And we're ignoring this to do what? To rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And to add insult to injury, this is an unfunded mandate. Who's going to pay to reprint the maps, the textbooks, the other printed and online material to reflect this change? Are we going to allocate even more taxpayer dollars to this crusade? Are we going to put this cost on taxpayer dollars in every individual state? This bill is a sycophantic attempt to wrap the American flag around this bill and does nothing to help Americans who are suffering and struggling to afford necessities, to create jobs. And those necessities, by the way, just got more expensive because of the aforementioned tariffs. It's not what we should be doing, and quite frankly, is embarrassing and making a mockery of this process. Let's do our damn jobs and do things of consequence. This committee does important work, and we have been able to work together to get things done. Let's continue to focus on that. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Mr. Lamoffa, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. It's kind of funny here watching the Dems go off for about 10 minutes on the bill so far, and then several speeches on it last time we heard the bill. Then I see there's a list of 20 amendments to the bill. It'd be real easy just to pass this little name change and not waste all this time we're hearing about wasting on the bill. It's coming from the other side with each of those amendments. If we hear them, it's going to be at least 5 minutes on one side, and then maybe the Republicans respond. So, 5 times 20, it's 100 plus, 20 times 2 responding by each Republican. That's 140 minutes or so. So,
Would the gentleman move to pass them by unanimous consent? I mean, I will stipulate to that. We just pass all the amendments by unanimous consent.
No, how about just the bill in chief instead all the time on the amendments, okay?
Thank you.
But taking my time back, thank you. We could hear a lot about wasting time here, but I'm more concerned about how much time ranchers are having to waste keeping wolves from devouring their livestock and defending themselves up there. But I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to keep track of the time a little bit. I'll give you 3 minutes back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If Republicans on this committee are serious about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, we should at least be honest about what is driving all this. My amendment proposes that rather than calling it the Gulf of America, we acknowledge what this bill truly represents, which is a departure from science, history, and common sense. We should call it the Gulf of Ignorance. Now, I acknowledge that there could be a robust debate about other words that one could put in place of ignorance, and I would accept friendly amendments from folks who might have a case to be made that it should be the Gulf of incompetence, maybe the Gulf of arrogance, delusion, bootlicking sycophancy, strong case to be made that that would be appropriate, or maybe the Gulf of alienating our allies and neighbors. But the bottom line is, I agree with the majority of Americans who've been polled on this. The Gulf of Mexico doesn't need a different name. But if the majority wants to spend the committee's precious time and resources on symbolic gestures to glorify President Trump, then it's important that we also recognize all the burning priorities that you're choosing to ignore by wasting time on this. You know, we could be talking about ways to save lives by preventing catastrophic wildfires, or collecting and protecting climate and weather data to save communities from extreme storms, or restoring public access to National Park Service websites that Republicans are frantically trying to cancel because they talk about things like history and science and the environment. There is no shortage of things that people need us to do in this committee, that they want us to do, and you are choosing to play naming games. I have a hard time believing most people in the Gulf of Mexico who have endured devastating hurricanes and extreme weather events see this as a good use of Congress's time, when we could be spending our time helping communities prepare for rising sea levels or the next natural disaster. In fact, an overwhelming number of Americans do not support renaming the Gulf. As I said, according to some credible polling, the Gulf is one of the most ecologically and economically vital regions in the Western Hemisphere, not just for the United States, but for a lot of other countries. It is home to productive fisheries, endangered species like the Rice's whale, unique deep-sea coral reefs and ecosystems. Its resources include resources that fuel industries, provide jobs, sustain coastal communities. And those real challenges, protecting ecosystems, building resilience, preparing for the future, deserve a seriousness. They deserve our serious attention, not political theater and a vanity project in order to please Donald Trump. If we want to rename the Gulf, let's at least be honest about what that says, that we're choosing to ignore science, history, and the pressing needs of coastal communities and the people we serve. That's why I propose an amendment to call it the Gulf of Ignorance, if that's really the way Republicans want to move forward. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Lamalfa, you're recognized.
Maybe amend it to the Gulf of Hyperbole, the Gulf of Hysteria. Tick-tock, tick-tock, we're losing committee time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I don't think anybody will be surprised to know that I oppose this amendment. This amendment would actually rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Ignorance, which is, to me, a very demeaning name. I don't know if that's meant to demean the region, the president, the country, or the people that work in the Gulf and do a lot of good for our country. So obviously, oppose the amendment. It's just one in a series of amendments that we will consider today that do nothing to improve the legislation before us. I urge all my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 3. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
I'll take the loss.
I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Huffman number 4.
Mr. Chair, I reserve a point of order on Huffman 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, colleagues, if we are going to waste important committee time renaming major geographic features for one man's ego.
Mr. Huffman, if you'll, without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
Thank you.
Now you're recognized.
Now I'm recognized. All right. So, folks, if we're going to waste this committee's time just to glorify one man's ego, I propose that we at least be efficient about this, right? I mean, that's the theme of the day, efficiency from Doge and others. And so the great Wayne Gretzky once said, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where it's going to be. And my amendment tries to do that. I mean, why do all of this Trump glorification in a piecemeal manner? Why not cut to the chase? And I am proposing that we rename the entire planet Trump. In the world that this administration is building and this committee is enabling, everything is about Donald Trump anyway. Republicans are proposing that we put his face on currency. His name is apparently going to go on Air Force One. You've introduced a bill to add his head to Mount Rushmore. His whims are shaping everything from who gets prosecuted to who gets silenced and who gets to participate in democracy. And so I would not be surprised if one of you actually proposes a 60-foot statue of him looming over the National Mall, as we've taken, some liberty to depict what that might be. We're trying to get ahead here and skate to where the puck is obviously going. So let's skip the endless parade of one-offs here. It's far more efficient to just cut to the chase, but let's be clear about what Planet Trump actually looks like. It's like a theme park from 1890, but with catastrophic climate dystopia. You're talking about the trade and economic policy of 1890, the foreign policy of 1890, science and education from the 1890s, deregulation and tax and wealth policy from the Gilded Age, the Wild West of gun violence for sure, but with modern, really destructive weapons. And back to the 1890s you go for health policy, civil rights, and a lot more. And a great example of that is our great scientific agency, NOAA, where thousands of scientists and public servants are being indiscriminately fired. These are people who forecast hurricanes, monitor climate trends, and protect our coasts. Apparently, it is back to the farmer's almanac when it comes to things like weather forecasting on Planet Trump. So, to my colleagues across the aisle, you're not governing with this stuff. You're sabotaging. A government that doesn't work isn't an accident resulting from all of this chaos. It's actually the plan. And you are doing nothing about it. While it all burns down, this Republican majority is spending our time trying to rename bodies of water. If you want a world where science is sidelined, facts are optional, public service is gutted in favor of gold-plated self-promotion, congratulations, you're living on Planet Trump. Let's stop pretending that any of this is about patriotism or efficiency. It is all about power, control, and making everything about one man. So let's just make it official. Show Donald Trump how mindlessly cultish you are. He's going to love this. Let's go ahead and rename the planet Planet Trump. I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. While I appreciate the ranking member's enthusiasm for President Trump, this amendment is outside the scope of the bill before us, which is to codify the name of the Gulf of America. I do urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
We just going to vote, or are you going to do?
There is a point of order reserved.
And Mr. Chairman, I understand that you're prepared to, I guess, spend all of this time on this legislation, but objecting to germaneness to my amendment. So rather than subject all of this to that exercise, I will withdraw the amendment, but stand by everything I said, certainly, about it. I yield back.
Without objection, the amendment's withdrawn. I recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Velasquez number 6. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Number 6, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Renaming the Gulf of Mexico is a distraction from all the damage President Trump is doing to our country. My Republican colleagues have us Here, talking about names on maps, while Trump's tariffs are making prices shoot up, and our country sees the largest number of layoffs and workforce cuts since the pandemic. Elon Musk is slashing programs that many of our constituents depend on, like Social Security, SNAP, food assistance, and the low-income home energy assistance program for energy bills, just before summer heat waves. And let's not forget the threats to dismantle FEMA, even though communities across the country are still struggling to get back on their feet after another year of record-breaking climate disaster. That includes Hurricane Helene, which killed more than 230 people across Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Emergency crews raced to evacuate nursing homes and hospitals, and thousands of people were trapped in their homes for weeks with no electricity. Entire towns were washed away in the flooding and mudslides. Homes and critical infrastructure were destroyed. Experts estimate that all this damage might cost up to $200 billion to repair, making Helene one of the costliest storms in U.S. history. Part of what made Helene so harmful was that there was little time to prepare. The storm intensified overnight, going from scattered thunderstorms to a Category 4 in less than 2 days because of abnormally warm waters in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico. While Doge is dismantling NOAA by cutting over 1,000 jobs, which means less real-time data on developing storms and less accurate forecasting for hurricanes before they land. The reality is that climate change is making storms more intense, more frequent, less predictable, and more dangerous. As a Puerto Rican American, I know all too well the human cost of hurricanes and how hard it can be to rebuild. Puerto Rico is still recovering from Hurricane Maria in 2017, the only hurricane deadlier than Helene. This committee should not be having a debate over renaming the Gulf, but if we're going to have this conversation, let's talk about the millions still recovering from Hurricane Helene who will live with the scars of this storm for years to come. They have not forgotten Helene, and neither should we. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to rename it the Gulf of Helene instead of the Gulf of America. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to strongly support my colleague's amendment here. If we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico, what better thing to do than honor the victims and frontline communities that are facing the climate crisis in this region? This climate crisis caused Hurricane Helene's rainfall to be 10% heavier, and if global warming continues at the current rate and reaches 2 degrees Celsius, which under Trump energy policies it will, devastating rainfall events like Helene will be 15 to 20% more likely to happen. So we are perhaps months away from the next catastrophic hurricane in the Gulf. And as we prepare for that, as we contemplate that, the Trump administration is wrecking NOAA, so we might not have good weather forecasting and good data as we head into the hurricane season. They're gutting FEMA and talking about eliminating it altogether, so the next community that is wrecked by a catastrophic hurricane certainly will have a harder time getting the federal assistance that it desperately needs. And this committee and House Republicans are fiddling while Rome burns. Here we are spending valuable time debating a bill that does nothing at all worthwhile. So I think this amendment is entirely appropriate, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. This is now the third amendment we're considering that renames the Gulf of America, this time as the Gulf of Helene, and I sincerely hope the intent of this amendment is not to make light of the devastating impacts of Hurricane Helene. It's disappointing to see yet another amendment of this nature. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, designated Velasquez number 6. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted. I recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Brownlee number 31. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the Republican leadership on this committee has decided to waste valuable time discussing frivolous and performative name changes, let's just lean into it altogether. That's why my amendment would change the name of the Gulf to the Gulf of America should rejoin the Paris Agreement. The administration and the Republican leadership want to bury their heads in the sand and pretend that if we just don't say climate change, then climate change will not exist. All the while giving handouts to the biggest polluters to destroy our clean air and clean water. This is not the leadership the overwhelming majority of Americans are looking for. In 2023, polling found 74% of Americans support the United States participation in international efforts to reduce climate change. One of the actions President Trump took on his first day in office was pulling the United States out of the Paris Agreement, the most fundamental international agreement to reduce climate change. It's felt like a lifetime ago since the early days of the Trump's presidency, and the GOP barreled full steam ahead on their anti-climate agenda, cutting critical investments in local communities, downsizing agencies' ability to respond to extreme weather events, and even wasting time and resources combing through agency documents to identify mere mentions of climate change. It's hard to track all the damage their actions have caused to the American public. But in the midst of all the chaos, we shouldn't forget some of the most harmful actions taken by this administration on Inauguration Day. So I urge support of my amendment. If my Republican colleagues want to claim that changing the Gulf to the Gulf of America highlights its importance for America's energy dominance, then I propose we instead consider changing our name to emphasize America's commitment to meeting our climate goals. With that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really like this amendment. Of course, I think congressional Democrats believe the entire exercise of trying to rename the Gulf of Mexico is a joke and a waste of time and a political circus. But if you think this is how Congress should be spending our time, renaming bodies of water, here's at least a renaming that would make a difference. I mean, if we called the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America should rejoin the Paris Agreement, that would stand as a constant reminder that science and climate reality are like real things, and that wrong-headed policies that wreck the planet for future generations are probably a pretty bad idea, and that America has a singularly important global leadership role to play on confronting this climate crisis. So here's actually a constructive suggestion. If you have to go down this path of burning Congress's time on name changes, let's change it in a way that would actually do something positive and make a difference. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose this amendment. It's another attempt to hijack the debate to talk about issues not connected to the legislation before us. The amendment does nothing to improve the legislation before us, and the decisions of the United States to participate or not participate in specific international agreements are a matter best debated in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, designated Brownlee number 31. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. And I'm going to request a recorded vote on this one. Further proceedings on the amendment designated Brownlee number 31 will be postponed. It's now in order to consider amendment designated Soto number 5, and I recognize Mr. Huffman for the purpose of offering the amendment. Without objection,
Renaming the Gulf of Mexico isn't a choice that should be up to just President Trump and even us here in Congress, especially not when Trump and his Republican allies are proving that they are shockingly out of touch with the wants and needs of the American people. On this issue alone, multiple polls have found that a supermajority, around 70% of Americans, oppose changing the name of the Gulf. And this debate is just a distraction from the many other unpopular policies my Republican colleagues are pushing, like cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, gutting supports for farmers, cutting wildfire preparation programs, and rolling back protections for clean air and clean water, to name just a few. These policies are so unpopular that many of my colleagues across the aisle have even stopped holding public town halls because of the backlash that they're getting from their own constituents. And just this weekend, mass protests took place across the country, from major cities to small, deep red towns. It's time we act like the democracy we are, and listen to the voices of the people we represent. For that reason, I'm offering this amendment, which would require a public comment period on the name change, following all the requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act, none of the rushed box-checking exercises like the administration's recent 5-day public comment period on a lithium mine in Oregon. A real comment period to hear from the American people. If Congress wants to rename the Gulf of America, it should be after input from the American people and with the support of the American people. I urge adoption of this amendment, and I yield back.
and the lady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this amendment, and I just can't imagine what Republicans would be afraid of by having a public comment period so that people could tell the administration what they think of this idea. I guess if you vote against this amendment, I guess we know what you're afraid of. We know that you realize that this is a dumb idea, that the overwhelming majority of Americans are going to tell you what a dumb idea it is, and they're probably going to tell you a lot more than that in a public comment period. But I do realize that, you know, hearing from the people these days is a little bit out of favor across the aisle. I hope that this is a moment for you to reconsider this position that you've been taking, denying town halls, and you know, what better way than to just have a simple public comment period on this knucklehead idea of renaming the Gulf of Mexico. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. The amendment would require the Department of Interior to conduct a public comment period pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act. This amendment breaks with precedent and law, as name changes subject to executive orders or congressional direction are not required to go through the APA process. And I will note that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have offered 3 name changes to the Gulf of America, and I don't think there's been any kind of public comment period before those changes were proposed. I oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, designated Brownlee number 27. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
Julia, do you want to record it? No.
I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Huffman number 2. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if Congress decides, against the overwhelming will of the American people, that we should officially rename the Gulf of Mexico. Let's be very clear about what this move to call it the Gulf of America actually means. My amendment is a simple statement that puts the name change in context because, as I've mentioned before, President Trump was not the first one to come up with this idea. In fact, it was the late-night comedy host Stephen Colbert back in 2010. This was at a time when the Deepwater Horizon disaster was raging. And to quote Stephen Colbert, he said, "I don't think we can call it the Gulf of Mexico anymore. We broke it. We bought it." That was the joke, and now the joke is on us. As my amendment says, the 2010 disaster resulted in the deaths of 11 workers, 134 million gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf over 87 days, the demise of thousands of marine mammals and sea turtles, and billions of dollars in economic loss from the fishing, outdoor, recreation, and tourism industries resulted. Big oil broke the Gulf, and the American people had to foot the bill for most of that disaster. My amendment notes that that BP was allowed to deduct $15.3 billion of its historic $20 billion settlement with the federal government over the disaster on its taxes, a massive tax break for these billionaires on the backs of the American people. And we are just days away from the 15th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Unfortunately, though, we are no closer to learning anything from it. The Trump administration is pushing ahead to expand drilling in the Gulf, including the ultra-deep water in the very area of the 2010 disaster. This deepwater drilling is especially dangerous because, as we saw in 2010, it is enormously difficult to reach and plug these wells when something goes wrong. It requires very specialized expertise and technology to work under incredibly technically challenging conditions. And as we've learned time and again, where you drill, you spill. That is a fact. It is unavoidable. And a spill in ultra deep water is especially tragic. Now, we are creating a perfect storm right now for the next catastrophic oil spill because the Trump administration is opening a lot of these waters to more drilling, and Republican members of Congress are moving forward with mandating oil and gas leasing to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. And all of this while the administration is firing federal workers who keep us safe. They're the same agencies and workers that enforce safety regulations, that oversee the oil and gas industry to make sure they're not cutting corners, like the corners that were cut that led to the Deepwater Horizon disaster. So we are inviting more disasters, more deaths, more fish, birds, and coasts smothered in oil, more harm to the millions of people whose lives, livelihoods, and recreational interests depend on the Gulf of Mexico. So look, if you're going to set up these conditions for America to absolutely wreck the Gulf again, let's just be honest about what that renaming means. I urge support for my amendment, and I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lamalfa,
Mr.
you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was out in the hall for a minute, and I only caught part of the reason there. Was this the sludge ball that's going down the Klamath River from the removed dams in my district that we're talking about causing all the wildlife harm, or was that some other subject that I was missing there? I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Is that a question, an inquiry? I'd love to answer.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 2. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted. I recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Velasquez number 12. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment says that the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico should not take effect if it's going to cost taxpayers money. So as President Trump and co-president Elon Musk used Doge to dismantle our government under the false pretenses of concerns about national debt, here you are, adding to the national debt. If my colleagues care about government efficiency, they will not devote time and resources to this political stunt. It costs money to replace maps, signs, documents, brochures, and books. It takes real staff time, which costs money too. One estimate is upward of $1 billion. $500 million for highway and road signs, $200 million for maritime charts and digital navigation, $100 million for government documents, $50 to $150 million for education and textbooks. What we should all care about is the Trump-Musk administration taking apart core government functions by slashing critical funding and firing devoted public servants. It is jeopardizing our emergency preparedness and putting more lives at risk. It is cutting funding for environmental justice grants that invest directly in communities that have suffered the most because of climate disaster. It is blowing a hole in our economy by getting rid of tens of thousands of jobs across the country. It's dismantling the government that serves us day by day. Working families across the country deserve better than this spectacle. I urge support for my amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? I recognize Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I strongly support this amendment. And look, it's bad enough to be doing this naming bill that nobody wants, that the American people clearly think is a dumb idea. But it adds insult to injury to then put it on the taxpayers' tab and actually pay all of these costs that Ms. Velasquez just outlined. Is not insignificant, these costs. So look, if you have to do this just to kiss up to Donald Trump, just find one of your oligarchs to pay for it. Don't ask the American people, as they are sacrificing with so many of these cuts to things that they need in their lives, as you're gutting the Social Security Administration, getting ready to hammer Medicaid, doing all of these other reckless and indiscriminate cuts that will make their cost of living higher, their life more difficult. At least don't ask them to pay for this dumb thing. Get one of your oligarchs to do it. And I think passing this amendment is a great way to make sure that that is the case. I yield back.